All right. Hello, I am Michelle Petersen. I'm a content person here at Secure IT 360. I am here with David Forrestall, our CEO and founder. Last time we talked, we walked through the larger DBIR findings for everybody. And today we're going to zoom all the way in on the one sector that got overlooked a bit. And it happens to be the second most breached industry in the whole report. So, with that, David, why don't you tell us a little bit about this segment that we're going to talk into?
Sure. So I did think it was quite interesting, why Verizon would choose certain industries over others. For example, they did educational services, looking at my notes here, financial and insurance, healthcare, manufacturing, public administration, and retail. But professional services, which had by investigation, had the second most highest number of breaches, they weren't analyzed. So to me, I thought that was kind of curious. And since we work with hundreds of law firms, that's kind of curious.
Yeah.
So we did do a deeper analysis of it, and what one reason may be is a lot of professional services kind of followed the norm of the whole of the entire report. Um, But what's really interesting too, as we dive deeper, and I can't remember our agenda, so if I go off script, there we go. But
We'll get back on.
many professional services firms are considered small business by Verizon, which is 1,000 employees or less. And within legal services, that is the vast majority of law firms are 1,000 users or under. So I think that there's definitely some context that can be added. I believe that they didn't see anything that really stood out, shining bright that they could really call attention to. But we can dive a little bit deeper and have some discussion about it.
Yeah, so just to level set, when you say professional services, who are we actually talking about, and why should a managing partner or a COO care about a number in a Verizon report?
Well, obviously, professional services is going to follow the NAIC code. It's going to be accounting firms, law firms, architects. Even, our firm is considered is a professional services firm, even though we don't fall into that code per se, that NAICS code. Um, so these are going to be uh, industries that are going to have most likely sensitive or client information as part of what they do as a professional service. They perform some type of consulting or advisory service many times. And so they also, since many of them do tend to be smaller or not as rigid like a financial services firm or a uh, healthcare industry, they many times don't have as rigid controls and as disciplined security, because you're working with a lot of higher level white collar professionals who have been educated and many times expect freedom to do their jobs. And so the security controls and constraints that you put on them sometimes inhibit them if you get too tight. So it's that balance of how do we let the professional have access to the information they need, which is sensitive. How do we partition it off, but yet how do we protect it so that they can use it? But if there was an issue with their account, say that it was compromised, that we would A, know it, and B, be able to reduce that blast radius.
So, in one sentence, why is this sector such a magnet for attackers?
It's This segment is such a magnet for attackers because of the types of information and the way that professional service firms work with typically a lighter security. Uh, Looking for the word here, not as strict of a security or heavy security controls in
Mm,
place.
okay. Nice one sentence too.
Yeah.
You followed my rule. Uh, all right, so let's talk now about it. You wrote a supplement and did another analysis of this. Let's talk a little bit about that and what you found. So walk me through this concept of the client multiplier. What does an attacker actually get when they compromise just one firm?
Well, it's whenever they compromise a professional services firm, law firm, etc. they're not just getting the information from that particular organization. That's the multiplier is they're getting, and that's what they want. They want all of that client information, and it's been well documented for several years now of what you might call a triple extortion. So double extortion is when you've got encryption and data theft. The triple or even quadruple extortion is when they go next to the client and say, hey, we got your data. We hit the law firm. Now we also have your data, and you need to pay us if you want to get it back. They can also use that as leverage to facilitate the payment of the ransom or put more pressure on the firm to pay the ransom. Or all these bad things are going to happen because now your clients are going to have impacts. You could have downstream costs for that, also to reputation damage, all of those types of things. So that's the multiplier is the not just the type of information, but the amount, because any decent sized law firm, even small law firms have hundreds of clients. Larger law firms have thousands and tens of thousands of clients.
That's a lot of clients.
Mhm.
um, well, that's another. So the other side of this is that these firms they hold the secrets. They hold the incredibly sensitive material, deal terms, financials, legal strategy, IP. But commonly, they kind of run leaner security than even the clients that they advise. So why do you think that gap exists?
Well, it's what we mentioned before. It's that demand for freedom. Well, also too, some of it has to do with size, since many of these organizations can fall in that thousand, maybe even call it 2,000 users or less. They might have a security team that has a few specialists. They might have part of it outsourced. But if you move up to a larger organization, many times their security teams are dozens, if not more. So they're relying on multiple parties, some of which they're contracting, and they're trying to create if you're trying to create a comprehensive security program, you really have to pay attention to how is all this interacting. Is our risk assessment comprehensive? How do we manage these other third parties that we depend on to keep us safe? And then two, sometimes you've got organizations that might have a CISO that is wearing multiple hats. They're CIO and CISO, and and many times they're they're resource constrained. Also, too, back to what we've mentioned earlier, there is that expectation of some freedom and professional um, flexibility so that the lawyers and other professionals can service the clients.
So there's the freedom aspect, there's potentially less resources or budget, but is there also an aspect of this idea that, oh, we've never been hit before by a cyber attacker, so we're probably fine?
Um, I think that organizations are waking up to this because it is a few years ago. Yes, that absolutely was the case, but um, even with some of the new stuff in 2026 with the Silent Ransom Group, now that we've said that law firms and other professional services have been in the crosshairs for years, and it's taken a while for the various threat actors to work their way through many of them. But now, practically if you can read the headlines or talk to your peers, everybody who works in legal knows of law firms who have been hit. So I believe the it won't happen to us has gone by the wayside for the most part. If somebody still believes that, then they are not paying attention to what's going on in the industry. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's gone by the wayside. I believe that the there's a little bit of fatigue. Um, we as law firms and other organizations, we have increased our security spend every single year, and that's one of the measures is I'm buying more products, I'm installing more security software. It appears to be doing what I need it to. How are they still getting around us? So, I have a job to do to maintain my organization, and we are a for-profit business, and if we don't maintain the organization and the professional services, in our main mission of serving clients, then why do we exist? So I can't, as an IT or security professional, devote all of my time fighting the bad guys. I have to support the organization as well. So there's kind of some fatigue there, I believe, where it's like, oh my goodness, like what now? I mean, now SRG, Silent Ransom Group, now they're showing up at our door and coming in and plugging USBs into the computers, acting as IT staff after they pretext or phish and try to get the victim, then and say there's some type of IT issue. Now they're actually coming and walking the floor and potentially going to the actual individual's computer and plugging the USB in, which I still I think that is a bit of an interesting headline that they are actually showing up. However, I still question, um, why would the receptionist let IT in if they don't know who they are? I mean, so this again is a solvable problem. Ask for an ID. Do we have you on the schedule to be here? Call the main IT desk and say, hey, I've got Joey here, even though he's got a Russian accent. Joey here that is wants to um, uh, work on IT. Does Joey even work for us? I've never heard of this guy. He's not even in the employee directory. You know, now, if these folks are good, they can do their research and find a legitimate name of an employee, but they need to have a matching ID. And then there's the USB controls is, you know, it can be somewhat painful, but can you somehow limit data exfiltration through a physical USB drive? Do the attorneys often need to copy data to a USB drive? Can you provide a secure way to do that? It is a bit of a challenge, I will say that, but it can be done.
Well, you mentioned the silent, we've been talking about the Silent Ransomware Group, and just to for those who don't know, they're specifically targeting, it's a Russian-based cybercrime group that are specifically targeting law firms, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, there was an FBI advisory out, I believe, at the end of May.
Yep.
There has been some tracking that we believe that it's some of the former Conti ransomware group, which has been disbanded and reorganized, and obviously in other ways, which is what these guys do. It's very hard to attribute. You can attribute the breach or the incident to the group, but it's very hard to attribute what individuals are of that group. So if there's a big takedown, which luckily there have been several, you can't really just go arrest all these folks because they're hard to find. And so what do? They resurface as a different group. But yeah, so SRG estimates right now are, as of today, June 30th, end of second quarter, we're looking at about $100 million of losses this year. So this is post Verizon DBIR. So the Verizon, what started this conversation? Verizon DBIR said, hey, it's kind of interesting. Vulnerability exploitation is now the top vector of attack, and success. That's how they're getting success. So that's interesting that it's new, and part of that we can say is because of AI, because now the attackers can weaponize exploits a lot faster to go against a said vulnerability. 0-day clock is now dropped down to below 8 hours. So from the time a vulnerability is announced, they can reverse engineer it within hours to have a working exploit to go after it. So that was a pretty big splash for the DBIR. But that was a lot of discussion. But number two is ransomware. 48% of all incidents and breaches investigated were ransomware, and it is still growing. Now, thank goodness fewer and fewer folks are paying the extortion. So but still the numbers going up. They are getting paid. They are making money off of this. And what SRG has exhibited some of the patterns that we are seeing that Verizon saw through their data set from last year, which is they're not even bothering to encrypt. they're just taking the data and saying, hey, we got your data, and so pay us. So the behavior we're seeing with SRG in 2026 does play forward what Verizon saw in their reports. Again, professional services law firms was more specific than they decided to do an analysis on. But this is we also looked at the other industries of the overall DBIR and said, here's what they said the trends were. Do we still see that? Because the data was published as of November 2025 data. So, here we are, 7 months later, 8 months later. And we did go back and look and say, well, they said these things happened. What happened after the release of the report? And for the most part, the trends continue to follow what Verizon saw at the end of 2025. Of course, their report wasn't published until April, I believe, of this year. So, and then SRG has basically followed that pattern as well. Ransomware will continue. It is still, one of the most prevalent attacks around. It is, many of the ways that the access is granted is through phishing. It's a little bit in social engineering. So that was one of the takeaways for professional services, even though they didn't do a specific analysis on it, is system intrusion and social engineering were the top two patterns of the incident, of the attack or the breach. So SRG is playing that forward, trying to social engineer with an IT emergency. If they're not successful right there, then they actually hire a criminal to show up and try to exfiltrate. And to them, they don't even care if these people get arrested; they're expendable because they're just trying to get their payday. They're offering some other local crook an opportunity to make a little bit of money, and if they get arrested, what does SRG care? They don't.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned ransomware, and one of the questions I have that I wanted to ask you about is, in it, like you cited the Verizon DBIR, that nearly half the breaches are involving ransomware. But as you mentioned, a lot of now the majority of firms are refusing, or victims are refusing to pay. So does that mean this is a little philosophical? Are firms winning, or are they just changing how they lose?
Are they winning? Are they changing how they lose? Um, Overall, even though the cyber, so I the fact that there's a couple of things at play here. So the fact that the average payouts going down is good.
Yep.
The I would say overall for most industries and especially legal that we have been involved with, the general and average security capability, cyber capability of every firm has increased. If it hasn't, then you have had ransomware. So you have been forced to raise the bar. You also have your clients that are requiring you to raise your security standards and requiring you to prove it. You have cyber insurance that's requiring you to raise your security standards and requiring you to prove it. And the reason they are doing that is because ransomware has been successful. So I would say that the firms uh, they're definitely better at detecting and defending against ransomware. Is it perfect? No, because now that it's harder for the criminals to encrypt, they're just trying to steal the data. So what's the easiest way for us to do that? Well, um, in some cases, is to show up with a USB, which actually there's another defense for this too, which firms can implement is, could we see or could we make sure that we're monitoring for use of any of the file transfer utilities, WinSCP, rclone, if we can't whitelist all software, could we, or whitelist various software and say we're only allowed to run these, we're not allowed to run these? Would we know if an individual's PC downloaded a remote management tool, which is another way that they do this? So there's other controls that could have been implemented to prevent this from happening, or at least detect it. If you can't prevent it because you have to allow some of these tools to run for the user to do their job, you could still get an alert and you could check with that user and say, hey, are you running this tool right now? Is there some reason you need to do a massive copy off of your machine? Um, yeah, but in general, most firms have 24/7 monitoring of some type, even if it's just with their endpoint solution. Most firms have some type of, and I say most, the vast majority of firms have some monitoring capability, have, or even better monitoring capability, have advanced endpoint protections, have difficult passwords, have multi-factor authentication. Those are the table stakes now for just even having a business if you don't want to meet these criminals through a lock screen.
Right. Well, and you mentioned AI as well. So from the aspect, monitoring to make sure there's not these file share. What about
Mhm.
AI? I mean, I feel like that is becoming a good way for people to get information off of their network, and maybe accidentally, but opens up a door to a whole bunch of other vulnerabilities, other risks.
And there's a couple of different flavors here. You've got how can the attackers use AI to better or to more efficiently advance their crimes. Then you've got the general dangers of AI usage. So you've got the attackers that can manipulate AI with um, by prompt, through prompt abuse. Um, they can. You've got the users that have unsanctioned AI usage that might be if the firm or organization hasn't laid out an AI policy and has authorized tools and unauthorized tools and has ways to monitor for those. You could have users inadvertently leaking data through unsanctioned AI tools, shadow AI. You can also have the through the manipulation of AI by the threat actor, where they all of a sudden could even potentially take over an agent that someone's using and assume that identity. And that agent is many times much more powerful than the actual individual user who is using that agent, because the agent can work at a speed much higher than me on my keyboard if somebody
Right.
was to take over an agent. So there's and the other piece too is vibe coding. So we're starting to see firms that are actually, you've got smart IT folks in there saying, hey, this vibe coding is pretty cool. I can talk to my computer and all of a sudden, tomorrow I have an application and I'm not really very good at writing code. Well, flashback, what's the number one uh, pattern of incidents and breaches is vulnerability exploitation. So go back to AI vibe coding. What do we have now? We have people who are not trained to write code that are talking to a computer and generating code. How are we checking that code to make sure that it doesn't have vulnerabilities? Can we trust AI to not use vulnerable libraries? Well, you would hope so, but we're finding that's not actually the case, because AI, many times when it's producing the code, it is actually trying to solve the problem in the best way possible. And it is not double checking um, libraries for that have known vulnerabilities. And then there's another piece too, is you can take libraries and string together various components to write an application, and each one can be relatively safe, doesn't have any known vulnerabilities. But by the time you string them together and connect them to other applications, vulnerabilities are created just by the way that they're being used. So that's even another way. So that's even a whole nother conversation that
Yeah.
we could have about AI vulnerabilities and AI security.
Yeah. Well, the other question I had too is, so we're talking about, law firms. We have information that is not just sensitive, but it also is potentially legally privileged. Does that change anything?
Um, well, I mean, there's the obligation of the firm to keep that information confidential.
Right.
But privilege by itself, it's a heightened responsibility on the firm. There's also ethics and professional responsibility that has been published over the years of if I'm a practicing attorney, what are the things that I'm supposed to be doing from a cybersecurity standpoint or from a confidentiality standpoint in this digital world to not allow a breach of confidentiality and a breach of privilege. So there is definitely a heightened ethical responsibility for the attorneys to maintain that privilege, whether it's by normal means or if it's digital, a digital document.
Yeah. Um, so to kind of wind down a little bit, if I'm a if I'm legal firm leader, and I'm a little alarmed hearing this conversation, reading the reports, seeing the news about the Silent Ransomware Group, what are the one or two things you'd have me do this week before anything else?
Um, I would say if you are not already in conversation with your IT or security or IT and security teams, whether they're employees or whether they're actually folks they're folks that you outsource your these functions to. Um, if you don't have regular dialogue with them and they're not providing you some type of assurance of how they're safeguarding and and have detection and defense capabilities against these attackers and other common risk, then you should do that. Have a conversation. And one thing I would say is you can throw the no acronyms rule, like, hey, technical people, I want to talk to you, but you need to speak to me in my language. So don't acronym me. So, and if you do get the acronyms or you do get the technical terms that you don't understand, you know, have them play it over and say, can you explain that differently in terms that I understand? And if they can't, you need to find somebody who can, because you need to feel comfortable um, that you're protected, and also too that the providers that are watching you are doing the right things to protect you because they're targets as well. So that was a subject we didn't even touch on, is another major source of breaches is third parties. So it can
Mm.
be MSPs, MSSPs, or even other folks that you're affiliated with, is where the software as a service providers, that could be where the breach comes from as well. So your third parties, you've got to understand that they are doing their part for security as well.
Oh yeah, I feel like we all remember what SolarWinds.
Hmm.
It was a
Yeah.
crazy time.
Yeah.
All right, so to close this out, maybe you can finish the sentence for me. The firms that handle this well over the next year are the ones that.
The firms that handle this well over the next year will be the firms that get to enjoy practicing law without having to clean up the spilt milk, so to say. Uh,
I like
so,
it.
mhm.
Great. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for joining me. Another great conversation. We'll be back again with another chat soon.
All right. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks.